Well, good morning. Most of you probably realize you haven't seen Winnie and me for about 9 weeks here. And we didn't decide we were going to drop out, just so you know. But about 9 weeks ago, Winnie was going to go in the hospital for a procedure that was going to be in the morning and out in the evening, but it didn't work that way. And she was in the hospital for over a week and rehab and home. So that's why we have not been here. But during that time, we had a lot of support from all of you. I know many of you, most of you knew about it and prayed for us, and we had help and loving action. So I'm here to say, first of all, thank you. And we appreciate it very much. And Winnie is in the back, hiding in the back somewhere there, but she is here, and her being here is a big example of how God has been caring for us and giving her strength and so forth and so on. But we're very grateful, and I just want you to know we thank you very much for that. This is a time when we're thinking about unstoppable moms. And in the passage that we're going to look at this morning, I thought about people that run races and do hurdles. And it always amazes me how a person can run and leap up in the air over top of something like that. And to me, I'd have to walk around it. No way I'd run over it. But it reminded, when I was thinking of the message this morning, I was thinking of hurdles that we all face. My bet is if you think of your life, you think of some time when you've encountered something and you thought, this is impossible. I don't know what I'm going to do. And you had to somehow get over that obstacle. You had to get over that hurdle and move on. And this morning we could think of, we're going to think of a woman in the Old Testament named Hannah, and we could call this message Hannah's Hurdles, because Hannah had some hurdles to get over that were really formidable. And I want to give you a little background just so you understand where we're coming at. Hannah is introduced to us in the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel is an Old Testament book, one of the early books of history. And Hannah has a husband named Elkanah. And if you read verse 1, it's got a lot of names about his history. I'm going to begin with verse 2, and where it says, Elkanah had 2 wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty in Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, 2 of the sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat he ate to Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. Now, by the way, remember, Peninnah's got many children. Hannah has none. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her. And the Lord had closed her womb. And because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. Now you have a little setting here. Hannah is a woman that was married to a man who has 2 wives. And Hannah, as I studied this passage, I found that Hannah had 5 hurdles she had to get over, 5 obstacles. We could say Hannah's 5-fold dilemma she has to get over. Now, you think of in your life of things you've had to encounter, you probably haven't had 5 of them that just kept wearing at you over and over again and kept wearing you down. And the first obstacle that Hannah faces is a God-ordained closed womb. In other words, God had ordained that Hannah have no children. Now, as I read the text, I suspect that Hannah was Elkanah's first wife, it says that he loved her. I have an idea that he loved her and married her, and then found out she could have no children. They found that out. So he married a second time to Peninnah, so he could have children. In that culture, you have to understand that culture. In that culture, having children was an important thing. It was your social security. As you got older, you counted on your children to take care of you. In addition, you counted on your children to help with the family work. If you were a shepherd, you had to have children go out and take care of those sheep. And they grew up that way. Now, when we read that God closed Hannah's womb, we have to recognize God sometimes does things that we don't understand and don't like. But God never plays games with us. And one of the first things Hannah has to grasp, Hannah has to believe that if God has ordained that she not have children, there is a purpose for it. Now, I want to make this real clear. God is a loving, compassionate, kind God who loves to bless. But sometimes he has a purpose and a plan that it makes life a little more uncomfortable for us. I mentioned to you, we expected that Winnie would go in the hospital and come out that evening. God allowed other circumstances to unfold, and God was never caught off guard. Now, we were, but God was never caught off guard. And sometimes what is the hardest thing is when we face a hurdle, when we face an obstacle, to dare to believe that God is in charge and he will allow it for some good. Now, there's a second obstacle, a second hurdle that Naomi is facing. She's facing a cultural curse because in that culture, a woman who didn't have children was looked upon with disgrace. In fact, I read a quote just to summarize it, and the quote says this: in the biblical world, the childless woman was not only sorrowful, but ashamed and disgraced. So she's a woman that people look at her, in some way she's inferior, some way it's something in their eyes see. So it's not only that God has not allowed her to have a child, but in that world, that puts her in a place where people look upon her as though she's not an adequate woman. She's not competent. She can't produce children in a culture where children are highly valued. Now, there's an interesting thing. In the Old Testament and in the New Testament, there are some women that were specifically identified as being childless. All of us know about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham was married to Sarah. Sarah couldn't have children. And Abraham and Sarah are older people. Abraham's probably about my age. Sarah was probably in her 80s, and they hadn't had any children. And Abraham's a very prosperous man. God had promised Abraham a whole nation is going to come out of him. But Sarah is barren, see. And so here's a woman and then you have, in this lineage, then Jacob has a wife named Rachel, and Rachel can't have children. He has a second wife, Leah, who has a lot of children. And it's breaking Rachel's heart. And now we have Hannah. And then if you come into the New Testament, most of you remember John the Baptist. Well, John the Baptist's mother and father were older, and she didn't have any children. Now, in the process of time, they did have children, but for many years, they lived with this sense of disgrace. You're not adequate. Now, here's an interesting thing about this. Of those 4 women that I've told you about, the sons that they did have became very significant people in God's plan. Just as one example, in the New Testament, Elizabeth was barren as well, and God ordained that she have a child, and John the Baptist was the forerunner of Jesus Christ. So my point is that these women lived in these kind of circumstances, but God had a purpose, but it didn't unfold by their time schedule, and they had to live with uncertainty, and even other people didn't understand them. And so she has a God-ordained, she's childless by God's ordination. She is living in a culture that's Christian, but there's a third hurdle she's got to get over. And that is she is living in a household with another woman who's Elkanah's wife, and this woman is giving her all sorts of problems. She's living with a persistent, condemning woman in the home, and Peninnah has got all kinds of children, and she loves to rub it in to Hannah. She loves to mock her and make fun of her. Yeah, look at you, you're nobody. And I suspect that I want to be fair to Peninnah, she probably felt as though she was less loved by Elkanah, because it makes a particular point in the text to say that Elkanah loved Hannah, and at this certain time gave her a double portion. And so I think this other wife felt this sense that she was not as well loved, and so she took what she did have and threw it in Hannah's face. And day after day, Hannah had to live in a household with a woman who was always reminding her, you're not a woman. You're not a woman. You can't even produce children. And that hurt. So these obstacles, these hurdles are not trite little things. It's not like you're just out running a race and it doesn't matter whether you win or not, you want to win. These are things that hurt. And in the text it says twice, year after year. So this isn't something that, hey, in a few days this will be all resolved. You may have something you have lived with for 20 years. And you may have prayed about it. Lord, I wish you'd take this away from me. God hasn't seen fit to do that. And that's where Hannah is at. Now, she's got a fourth hurdle. I told you. There are a lot of hurdles. She has a fourth hurdle. She's living with a loving but a naive husband. Now, Elkanah is a good man. Elkanah is a man who really cares for his wife. But listen to what we read in the text about Elkanah. It says, Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more than 10 sons? Now, I said to you, he's a good man. But that is a dumb statement. It's, hey, look at me. You got me. Why do you worry about sons? Because nobody curses because I'm married to you. They're mocking me and cursing because I don't have any children. And I have to live with this day after day, and you come to me and say, hey, well, look, you got me. Now, I've said to you, he's a good man. Some of us don't really stop and think about what somebody else is living with. Some of us don't realize, if I was in that place, would I like to be where they're at? And so she lives with a husband, and she would say, Elkanah's a good husband. He cares for me. I know that. But he doesn't understand the hurt that I'm experiencing. He doesn't, and probably Peninnah probably doesn't say those things when he's around. She says she mocks and she criticizes when he's not around. So he doesn't realize what Hannah is living with day by day. Now, 4 would seem like a good number of hurdles, but actually there's one more, and that is that Hannah also has the hurdle of a priest who doesn't understand her, a judgmental priest. In this Old Testament setting, periodically they would go to a place of worship. And so Hannah, this has been going on year after year, and Hannah is at this place where she's just so discouraged, and she comes to the place of worship, and she just is pouring out her heart to the Lord. And she says, this is what we read in chapter 1, verse 13. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved and her voice was not heard. So when the priest is looking at her, he's looking like this woman's kind of there mumbling. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put away your wine from you. Here's a woman coming, needing compassion, coming to a place of prayer, and the priest thinks she's drunk. Now again, that's a mistake that we could easily make, looking at someone and judging them by outward appearance. See? So now, think about this. Here you are, living, here you're Hannah. You have enough things to face that don't go away that you're just worn out. Year after year, you live with this. What is this doing to Hannah? What's happening to her in this result? Supposing this went on for 10 years. It easily could have gone on for 10 years. And Hannah is just brokenhearted. Here are some things that that we face. You know, it says she has a bitter spirit. She's discouraged. She's downcast, deeply distressed. In verse 10, it says she was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. A brokenhearted woman without hope. Now, I hope you can stop and really enter into this. This is not an intellectual discussion. I'm not teaching you just Bible facts. I'm talking about a woman who faced a hard life, is living with great discouragement, and nobody can take it away. There's nobody in this whole account that's been able to come to Hannah and say, hey, I can help you with your problem. And there are problems that we face that are hard problems, and medical skill or counselors or none of them can take them away. It's something we live with day by day, and sometimes we just feel weary of carrying that heavy load. Now, you may be thinking I'm talking about somebody that's 50, 60 years old. You can be a high school student going day after day and somebody mocking you and bullying you, and you come home and you weep and you say, Mom, this is so hard. And you say, well, yeah, but you got to go to school and just, tough it up and go, Even a loving mom may not understand. See? So you can be a high schooler facing something year after. Maybe you are not naturally a student and you work hard, you try to study, and you go in and take an exam and you fail and say, well, if you just tried harder. Maybe you go to work tomorrow and you know that boss doesn't like you. And you honestly have tried, you've prayed and you've tried hard, but that boss doesn't just go away, and every time you go, he's always telling you, well, if you could make sales like Hank does over there, you'd be somebody, but look at you never do. That's the reality of life, see. Now, there is good news. We're not going to leave Hannah destitute, because there's one resource that Hannah has now. And that one resource is the only person that can really help Hannah over these hurdles that seem so hard and so impossible to get over. And I think you know where we're heading that. But we know that, so Hannah turns to the one resource she has. She turns to God in prayer. The one person who can help her. So when she turns to God, who is she turning to? Let's think about how God is going to help her. Number one, God is a compassionate, listening God. When she comes to this place of prayer, here are some words that Hannah says to God in prayer. She says, look on me in my sorrow. God, here, see what I'm going through. Answer my prayer. She says, if you give me a son, I will dedicate him to you, that all his life he will serve you. She comes to the Lord, to a God who listens and cares, and here is the one person that can help Hannah. And what I want us to think about this morning, we thought about all these problems, but do you know how to go to God with the thing that is such a heavy load? And do you know how to go to God and find in him a deeply compassionate, understanding God who really does understand what you're going through? I think in this room we all believe in prayer. But one thing that in my studying of Hannah, it challenged me to think about my own prayer life. You know, we talk about having a prayer list or something like that. And it's easy to, to pray for other people and kind of go down the list. Lord, bless this person, bless this person, bless this person, bless. And then we say, well, I prayed today. What did you really pray, or did you just give God the grocery list? So what does it mean to pray to a God who's compassionate and listening when you're... What do you pray about? Do you just pray, boy, I hope the sun shines today, Lord, Lord, I hope I have enough gas to get to work. Hannah is praying about something that is significant in her life, that is deeply meaningful. It challenged me to think about, when I do pray for somebody, do I pray for someone with a passion that I care about that person in a way that I'm really coming before the Lord on behalf of that person? But there's a second thing that you'll notice about her prayer. And this is, again, very significant. Hannah prayed until she got an answer. Now, that you say, well, what's the big deal about that? I'm going to challenge you about your prayer life, because I don't know how you pray, but I know the challenges I feel. Do you pray until you get God's answer, or do you just tell God what you want and just walk away? See, I think there's a difference between just praying about things, talking to God about things, and saying, God, here's an issue that is really important. This is something that's really significant. God, I need to understand what you know about this, or what your thoughts are about this, and I need your help. There's a verse in the New Testament that's been of really significance to me. It's in Philippians chapter 4. It's verse 6 and 7. In Philippians 4, Paul writes, and he says, be anxious for nothing. Boy, I'll tell you, Hannah needed that verse. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. So, knowing I don't have to live with anxiety, I bring it to God in a way that I hear his response, because the verse says, with thanksgiving, and the peace of God that passes all understanding shall guard your heart and mind through Jesus Christ. What it's saying, and I hope you hear what I'm saying, what the verse is saying and what this is about is you pray until you hear God tell you what the deal is, and you can walk away and say, okay, now I know what God is about. That may mean you pray for more than once. But here's the thing that I think is happening. In fact, I know this is happening. Hannah, in this situation, got some word from God where she could then walk away from that and say, now I'm at peace because I understand it's in God's hands. And so she didn't have to carry it. Many years ago, when my children were younger, I used to think about I'll use my son Joel. Joel would go out with his buddies, and they would go to these places, and they used to hike up a place called Weaver's Needle. And somebody told me once, that's kind of a risky place, that you could fall and hurt yourself. And I thought, wow, that's interesting news to have. And I realized that my son could be in places, and I couldn't watch Joel for 24 hours a day. But God could. And there was a point of an act of faith, a specific act of faith. I did this with every one of my children, where as I prayed, I envisioned myself putting that child in God's hands and saying, God, I can't guard my child, but I'm going to put my child in your hands and trust you with my child's life. And what that meant for me was then I could be at peace when my child was out away from me. I could be at peace. He's in God's hands. And so, see, I had peace about it because I would put it in God's hands. I knew God would take care of him. In this prayer, something happened in Hannah, because here's the third thing that I notice in this passage. Hannah's prayer resulted in peace and joy. Now, notice the text. It says, then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Prior to this, she didn't even eat food. If you go back and read chapter 1, it'll tell you. She was so discouraged, she didn't eat meals. Now, something has happened. Now she's got an appetite. And there's lots of places in the text that talks about her being downcast, or having a bitter soul, and so forth and so on. And notice it says, and her face was no longer sad. Something happened in that prayer that Hannah could walk away from there and say, God's got it. And I know God's got it, and I don't have to carry it any longer. I know in this room, or maybe who's watching, there's some of you that are carrying something that's breaking your heart, wearing you down, and you need to be able to go to God in prayer and pray through it until you know God is saying to you, I've got it. You don't have to worry. I've got it. I'm taking care of it. But you got to let me do it my way, because, after all, I know the way it should work out. Now, so my question to you is, what are you carrying that's leading you to discouragement or disappointment or heartbreak or whatever it is, that you need to go to God in prayer and leave it in his hand and hear him say to you, my child, I've got it. Stop worrying about it. Stop carrying it, because I've got it. She went away ready with a good appetite, and her face was no longer sad. So what does this teach you and me about prayer? Well, let me back up. It teaches us, first of all, we're all going to face hurdles in life. We're all going to face things we can't cope with. I don't care how successful you are, how well educated, what your health is. When we went in the hospital, we had no idea when he was going to face a hurdle, and I was going to face it with her. There was going to be a 9-week long, and when he's still in recovery. But God had it from the beginning. That wasn't a mistake, that God wasn't looking. Oh, I wish I had been watching more closely. God knew that this was a journey that we were going to go on, and we were never outside of his loving care. And with that in mind, I can say to you, God gave me peace through the process. And I know some of you in this room, just simply by the number of people here, some of you are carrying something, and you need to let God carry it. But it's not just saying, well, I'll let God carry it. It's going to God, and in your spirit, either through someplace in Scripture or in your spirit, knowing that God is saying to you, let me carry it. I've got it. You don't have to worry about it. So there's only one last thing that needs to be said. If you don't know God, if you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, then you don't really have the authority to come and pray in that way. Christ died for you and me. Christ bore our sins that we could have an access to God through Jesus Christ.